I thought that was absolutely brilliant, an absolute privilege to get that sort of insight into the process of such fantastic artists. But what I'd like to do is broaden the discussion slightly and just think about the way that most of us experience art or music, which is my background, most of the time. Because I think that actually all art and music have political ramifications of some sort, and I think it's important to recognise that. Every time you turn on an episode of The X Factor or American Idol, or you watch a video on MTV or something like that, and obviously billboard adverts and so on, you're being invited to internalise a set of values, a set of ideas about what's cool, what's desirable, what's normal, and so on. And so I think we have to recognise that while there are these brilliant, exceptional artists like the ones we've heard from, that most of the time art and music operates really as a weapon of mass distraction. And I think we have to be mindful of that. So the question is, what about those of us that do want to use art and music to directly challenge the foreign policy of our government, or to directly challenge and undermine and question the sorts of values that we're handed down through the mass media? I think we do face some challenges, and we have to sort of have a talk about the sorts of contradictions that exist. You see, while we can control the content of the art, the lyrics in our songs and what's on the canvas and what's in the photo montage and so on, we can't always control the context in which our bit of art is consumed. And indeed, if there's some commercial success, certainly in the music industry, you can't control where a large chunk of the money goes, and therefore you get these classic contradictory situations. The examples I've got are from my world, which is the world of music, and you'll be familiar with them, I'm sure. Of course, there was the Bruce Springsteen anti-Vietnam War song, Born in the USA, which was used at a Republican Party conference to bring the war criminal Ronald Reagan to the platform. And the Rolling Stones, when they were doing gigs against the Vietnam War, Keith Richards was absolutely shocked to find out that the money that they were generating through record sales was going to their record label Decca, who were working hand in glove with the American military machine at the time. I think their sister company was making the black boxes that went into the American bombers. So there are some very real contradictions, and I know that Keith Richards was absolutely shocked by that. But those sorts of contradictions, they come up all the time. I mean, I've come across lots in my career, which are perhaps less spectacular, but no less disturbing sometimes. But they shouldn't put political artists and political musicians off. I think all we need to do is think about ways that we can minimise situations like that and sharpen up weapon of music as a weapon for progress and against war and so on. And there are different ways of doing that. One, of course, is to make explicitly political art, and I think you've seen some fantastic examples of that coming from the last three artists. In the context of the Bruce Springsteen example, I mean, perhaps a better chorus is war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing, rather than Born in the USA over and over again. It's, you know, some pieces of art are much more difficult to co-opt than others, and interestingly enough, Bruce Springsteen tends to perform those two songs back to back now, I think, in order to clear up any ambiguity about the meaning of Born in the USA. Another thing that I think that we should do, because of course not everybody wants to make explicitly political art, and there should be room for nuance and ambiguity in art and in music. So another thing that political artists can and should do is to recognise that their work, their inspiration, their politics come from a movement which is much bigger than them, which probably predates their interest in the politics. And I think that they should be publicly associated with that movement. I think it's very important that musicians and artists are on the demonstrations or on the picket lines, are playing and performing in Tahrir Square and Trafalgar Square. I think it's very important to make that explicit link with the movement. Again, it makes it much more difficult for the art to be sort of co-opted by those who we disagree with. And the other thing I think that we should think about is that as artists locked into a much bigger economic machine, we have to recognise that on some occasions the best thing that we can do is to refuse to play, to refuse to do our job. And I'm very proud to say that the band that I've done a lot of work with, Faithless, joined the cultural boycott of Israel last year. Now, if you want to talk about why I think it's good that we join the cultural boycott, and why I think that that's a very important thing as part of the wider boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, we can talk about that more in the discussion. But what time I've got left, I'd like to spend by telling you about the song that the chair mentioned, and I think some of you might already know about it. But my belief is that as musicians, we shouldn't only refuse to play in Israel at the moment, but we should also try to use music and art to build solidarity with Palestinians. And so that's what I've tried to do with this song. It's deliberately kind of poppy. I've tried to make it accessible. I'm trying to reach a broader audience perhaps than has been reached by songs about this subject before. And it's going quite well. So far, so good. I think John Hillary mentioned at the beginning of the first session that we've had well over 250,000 plays on YouTube in the 10 days since we went live on the internet with the tune. We've had a hilarious, incoherent attack from Glenn Beck on Fox News, who described me as evil, and the song was propaganda, so that was fantastic. And we've had all sorts of endorsements from people as diverse as Coldplay and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So there's a real sense of momentum. We're only 10 days into what we've called the pre-release period. The song actually comes out on the 3rd of July, but you can pre-order the song now. And I'd like you all to do that. You can pre-order it from hmvdigital.com or from iTunes. Now, the reason why I'm asking people to do this is because we'd like to get the song into the charts. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably don't care what goes on in the charts, but there are political reasons why I think this would be worthwhile on this occasion. Firstly, if we get the song into the charts, it's going to be much harder for BBC and commercial radio to ignore or to censor the song, which we know is a real question at the moment. Secondly, I think if the song does get on commercial and BBC radio, or if it gets a lot of press attention because it's in the charts and the BBC are refusing to play it, they're refusing to play it even in the chart countdown on the Sunday afternoon. In that situation, if the song is talked about, people hear about it, I think that will give a lot of confidence to people up and down the country to start talking about Palestine. And perhaps for people who haven't heard much about Palestine, who don't know much about it, it will spark an interest and they'll go out and find out more. So that's the second reason. And thirdly, it does send some sort of a message. It's not the most robust, the most democratic way of sending a message, but nonetheless it does send some sort of a message that a critical mass of people in this country are fed up with what's going on. It sends that message to the government and to anyone who gives economic or political support to Israel. It sends a message saying we want that to end. So for all those reasons, I hope that you'll get behind the campaign and support the song. If you think about it, if you go to HMV Digital, you can buy a copy for 79p. I would usually say less than the price of a cup of tea, but this conference is so cheap, that's not true. It's not true. But for 79 pence, if you think about it, that's potentially the best 79 pence you could spend for Palestine for the reasons I've outlined. So I hope very much that you yourselves will go and do that at the moment the meeting finishes, perhaps even before if I'm not upsetting the chair by saying you turn your iPhones on and you go to iTunes now and you pre-order it and you encourage your friends to do so, your local Stop the War groups, your colleagues at work and so on. We've got flyers available at the conference with all the information. The website for the song is freedomoneworld.com. So please repost the video on your Facebook page and so on. If we do make any money, it will go to support projects in Palestine, but this is not primarily about raising money. This is about raising a political consciousness. Forgive me, those of you who have heard me use this quote before. I'm going to use it again because it's a good one. What we're trying to do is what Edward Said urged us to do, which is to use the power of culture against the culture of power. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you.